Hello and welcome to Enquire to Choir. My name is Eva and I'm here to help you, fellow choir people. A while ago, I did a video here on the channel about choir conducting, which really resonated with you. That really makes me happy and thankful, even though at first I was a little bit surprised. I don't consider myself any authority in this space, but I do get where you're coming from, because 10 years ago I didn't know how to conduct either, until I was thrown in the choir arena all by myself and I learned along the way, with no one to learn from. This is actually the reason why I started this channel, for you not to be in the same position as I was back then. In that video, we go through the basics of the conducting signs, and you get the general idea of how to do it. But taking that knowledge and applying it is, as you probably know, a very different thing. You can know everything in your head, but it's like playing the piano or driving a car. You know what your hands need to do and when they should do it and where you have to look, but somehow it just doesn't work like that. You can think all you want, but the hands and the feet and the eyes don't do what they're supposed to do. That's not because of the lack of intelligence, it's because it's a different kind of learning. To learn that skill and to learn how to conduct, you need to do motor learning, which is a complex process. It needs a lot of practice and it needs time. The problem with conducting a choir is we often need a choir to conduct, to practice conducting. Many of you don't have that luxury all the time, or any time at all. Choir performances are not frequent, and during rehearsals you mostly spend your time on choir directing, learning new scores, practicing scores, etc. The question is, how to become a good choir conductor in any case? So when you do have a choir in front of you, eventually you are already a better choir conductor than you were before. I've thought a lot about this. So in this video, I will give you advice in 3 situations. What you can do when you are alone, when you don't have a choir in front of you, what you can do when you do have a choir in front of you, and what you can do during the performance on the stage. My main point of these advice is that they are really practical, efficient, and useful. And it's not just about practice the score you have to conduct, because I don't think that's really efficient. You have to conduct. To be able to conduct, you have to be a conductor. And conducting in general is very different than learning how to conduct a single score. I think this thought will become much clearer during the video. Just practicing the score you have to conduct can only take you so far, because the conductor has to have it. Music is a time-based art. You can't predict it. Anything can happen during a performance, even to a really well-rehearsed choir. You never know. And if you, as the conductor, are prepared for only perfectly practiced score, well, in my opinion, you are looking at very uncertain conditions. So I hope you find this video helpful. If you think about conducting in a metaphysical way, when you conduct, you organize time. I know that sounds like a stretch, but hear me out. So you have the choir in front of you and they're going to perform a song. The song has its length. It has the beginning and the end. Who defines the beginning? You. Who defines how fast the song will go, how slow the song will go? You. You organize that time for them. So as a conductor, you have to be in order, but at the same time, you have to be flexible, because we, the people, are not machines yet. And music has a soul. So conducting is always about balancing that fine line between having everything in control, doing everything right, and giving the freedom for things to develop. Because as you probably have experienced in your life, when you do music perfectly right, perfectly correctly, it doesn't have that something that it should have. But the freedom while performing music comes from knowing the score you're performing really well. You really have to learn it and to know it before you are able to be flexible with it. So for this reason, the first thing I will introduce in this first section, what you can do without Enquire alone, is this. I have younger generations here, so I'm not sure if this will be an immediately recognizable thing, but this is a metronome. This is a 25-year-old digital metronome. It's one of my proudest possessions. And I'm not even sure if they're still producing this, but they absolutely should, because the person who designed this is an absolute genius. Because as you will see during this whole section, it is very, very anatomically great. So this is our worst enemy and our best friend in this case, a metronome. Why a metronome? Because you need to have a sense of tempo. That is something that needs time to develop in you. If you think about it, in our bodies, we have rhythms and tempos. We have our heartbeat, for example, and it's steady until it isn't. While you're performing an exercise, for example, physical exercise, your heartbeat becomes faster. And what are you doing during conducting? You are doing a physical exercise. So your sense of tempo, even your heart goes faster, plus all the additional things that can interrupt your sense of beat and tempo. So this is where the metronome comes in, because this is something you can practice. It needs time to develop. You don't need to learn how to stay in tempo all of the time. It's about getting the sense of staying in tempo, running away from the tempo, and learning how to develop an inner ear, an inner GPS for the time organization when it comes to music. For example, the first thing I would recommend is to be in silence, so without any music in your head or in front of you playing, and just learning different speeds. So for example, this is 120. Okay? Just listening to the beat and trying to conduct. For example, a 4 would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Try staying in this tempo for 3 minutes and conduct at the same time. Then go to a slower tempo. For example, this is 92. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's immediately very obvious that the style of conducting is different. You really don't have the time to do as many movements in the slower tempo and in the faster tempo. So in 92, I have the time to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. But in 120, I don't, because if I do, I'm slowing myself down. So the difference in conducting styles is immediate. You put on a metronome, you define yourself a beat, so a time signature. So is it a 2, a 3, a 4, or any other number? Put it on and try to stay in tempo. And let me know how that went. Was it difficult? Was it easy? At which moment were you like, oh my God, this is so hard? And the special thing about the sound of silence is you don't have any reference points. So you have to listen to your inner GPS, because you always know that the metronome is telling the truth. So whatever you're thinking the tempo is, if it's not aligned with the metronome, then it's not correct. So you're reconfiguring the GPS in your body, in your ear. Another way to practice this is to change the number of beats in a bar. For example, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. A very good practice is 2, 3, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. That can become really useful. And then you can practice setting a number, staying in tempo, and doing a ritenuto, slowing down, and finishing the score. For example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and. It's about learning how to ignore the metronome. Special mention goes to the exercise that you do a ritenuto and then you come back to the tempo. Let's try that on YouTube. The things I do for you, my people, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That was all in one breath, so my vocal breathing technique works. Look at the video here. Okay, so you do all of that in the sound of silence, not the song, the silence. And then you can add a melody in your head. And you will see that when you conduct with the score in your mind, it's a very different thing. And that especially becomes obvious when you are singing. Because the problem with singing is you have to take a breath at some point. And when you take a breath, the tempo is not on the mark, but you can learn how to always adapt. Because if you develop that sense of stability when it comes to tempo, that solves a lot of problems. So metronomes are our best friends. Although I have to say, I've had this for more than 25 years and I've only changed the battery once, so don't tell my piano professors that. Along with ritardando, ritenuto, accelerando, and all of that stuff, you can practice going to crescendos and decrescendos because that can affect the tempo as well. Don't be afraid to do everything with it. You can do a lot with it. And the sense of stability when it comes to tempo gives you so much. Even if you're in the worst position when it comes to stage fright, if your inner GPS knows the tempo and it's used to the beats of the metronome, you always have an inner reference point. So don't shy away from it. The second advice when it comes to this is to analyze the score. I've recently done a video when it comes to choir directors, and I completely agree that you should watch it and it's useful. But when it comes to conducting, you need to know the score visually, where everything is, how many pages, on which page is what thing, where every voice starts, where accompaniment starts, how many bars is the rest, how many bars till the next voice comes in. You really need to know it, and you really need to know all the things you need to do. You need to practice how many bars, and you have to practice it all the time. I had a performance on Wednesday and I wasn't sure if my sopranos have to come in after altos or at the end of the altos. And it turned out that I really needed to look at the score and I really had to tell myself while the altos are singing, I have to give a sign. So I did. But being unsure of that was a sign that I really needed to learn it because I really obviously don't know it yet. It's a new score for me as well. You can mark all you want in your score, all the colors, different colors for every voice part. That's amazing. Circling all the beginnings, great. it's all helpful. You are not always in the position that you are able to see the score in front of you really well, so you really need to know it. What if you don't manage to turn the page at the right moment for yourself and you are not sure what is next? Know your scores. Number 3 is connected to the previous thing I said. Know your score from every beginning. I would advise you to learn your score backwards. It's really rare that I see that only certain parts are practiced, or that you practice from the last part and then the second to last and from behind. You can't do it backwards, obviously, but if, for example, a score has 3 parts, then you first sing the third part, then you sing the second and the third, and then from the beginning. This is something that is really useful because you train your brain to know where to start from in any case. As I said, you never know what will happen, and I'm not being negative about it. I'm just, preparation is key. So if you know every beginning and you don't have to think about it while you're conducting, you have that control and you have that knowledge to be able to go to the freedom part of conducting. Number 4, I got a very good question about, do I have any scores I recommend practicing to? I thought a lot about it, and it turned out that it's such a general question. I don't know what it's useful for you because I don't know the kind of choir you're conducting to. But I managed to come up with 2 answers. The first answer is you practice the national anthem. The probability that at some point in your life, in your choir life, you will have to do a national anthem, the national anthem of your country, is huge. National anthems tend to be really stable. They don't interfere with many musical developments because it's about the expression of the lyrics mostly, the very loud stability of the country. So that's the national anthem. It's usually not something very complicated to conduct. It doesn't have many changes. And it's very useful if you learn it because the probability, as I said, is really high that you will have to perform it as well. Also, if you have certain holiday songs you are hearing all the time and are really common, something that is not too complicated, but it challenges you. For example, Joy to the World, it has the conducting we talked about in the analysis of that score, even though, for the most part, all the voices are singing together at the same beat, at the same rhythm. But then change happens and the sopranos and altos go together and tenors and basses follow in response. So that is something I would really recommend. Out of all the things you are going to do with your choir, I think national anthems and holiday music is very probable. But I also have 2 very I don't know what the reaction will be for this, but I think, in my opinion, that these 2 scores are really, really useful. And the problem with this idea is that they are not choir music, they're orchestral music. But hear me out, okay? Maurice Ravel, Bolero. Bolero is an orchestral piece where the same melody is repeated all the time through all the instruments, through the orchestra. The beat is the same all the time. The tempo is the same. And what is interesting, if you ask someone who knows the bolero, they will say that tempo goes faster and faster. And that is not the truth. It stays the same, but the music becomes louder and louder. So it goes from the softest sound to the largest sound by always repeating the same melody through different instruments. It's a really difficult piece for the percussionists. Why am I talking about this so much? Because the practice, the exercise I want to give you is this one. You don't have to look at the score. You don't have to know it. But while listening to it, you can analyze every instrument and put it in the voice group it would be in your choir, for example. So a flute would most certainly be a soprano. The trombone would be a bass. And you do this kind of division, and then you put on a performance and you try to conduct it while respecting the tempo, the dynamics, and showing to your voice parts. It's a very good practice of inner stability, of stamina, of knowing where everyone is without losing your train of thought. You will feel tired, and that is the point. You practice your rationality because it's a really difficult piece to conduct, but it's a very good practice, and it becomes a bit more manageable when you divide the instruments into your voice parts. Let me know how that went, because I would be really interested to know, was it frustrating? And the second orchestral piece I want to recommend to you is George Gershwin, Rhapsody in Blue. That score has so many changes, so many time signature changes, so many characters changes in such a small amount of time. It doesn't matter if you do everything correctly. And again, I'm not expecting you to learn the score or see the score, but it's just about learning how to adapt to the new situation, because you, in that piece, you just manage to get the rhythm and get the tempo, and then suddenly on to the next thing. So that is something that can really make you feel like it makes you be more spontaneous, but always in control. So the Bolero and Rhapsody in Blue, two non-choir pieces that I think will help you a lot. When it comes to the things you can do with your choir, you have to look at them. You have to be able to look at your choir. You have to face your choir. That is something that I had to learn. And when I'm not looking at my choir and I'm avoiding their eye contact, that's when I know that I'm not sure of myself when it comes to conducting, that I don't know something. So it's a very important thing. You have to make yourself confront your choir, even visually. You have to be able to look at them, and you will not be able to look at them if you're still looking at the score. The first thing I want to tell you when it comes to how to practice conducting with your choir is conduct all the time. Don't wait for your conducting to be learned and then coming to the rehearsal and deciding, okay, now I will conduct. There are many things you can conduct to practice, because let's remember, the main point is that this is a different kind of learning. You need a lot of practice, and it asks for a lot of time. So conduct all the time during the rehearsals means when you introduce a new vocal warm-up, a vocal drill, you can conduct it. You, or ha 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 he 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 ho ho ho. And if you do that for every vocal warm-up before actually starting to play it, that can become really useful. With time, that becomes second nature. Also, every time you're starting from someplace new, because we're not always practicing from the beginning to the end, every time you say to your choir, bar this and this, give them a conducting sign to start. Or every time you're singing a new melody for them, because you're learning the new score, conduct it as well. These are all the opportunities to conduct. If your rehearsal is an hour long, you'll already practice for at least half an hour. During the rehearsal of the choir, you practiced conducting. The conducting doesn't have to be for them necessarily. It's for you. And it doesn't have to be correct all the time. It's about you developing that spontaneity when it comes to it. Don't think, I don't know this perfectly yet. I don't want to embarrass myself, so I'm not going to do it until I practice this skill. If you have the opportunity to do it in front of the choir, just do it. And avoid saying things. Don't go 1, 2, 3, go. Conduct it. Because if you teach your choir to start on 1, 2, 3, and you had the opportunity to teach them to start 1, 2, 3, okay, that's a very different thing. They will not be able to start singing on your conducting sign only if you have taught them to start on 1, 2, 3, go. So avoid doing that. because you're not able to do that during the performance as well. Plus, you define the tempo for them. Don't let them define the tempo for you. Conducting is about you telling them how to organize the time. And that is something you need to develop. So do that in small fragments during the rehearsal. Every time you're starting from some place in the score, give the conducting sign. Even if they don't notice it. Even if they're not able to look at you because they're looking at the score. The next thing is something that is really, I don't know if that's a secret or if that's a forbidden thing, but I think this is really useful. If I don't know how to conduct something when it comes to a certain situation, there is a difficult rhythm, a difficult tempo, a difficult transition or something, and I'm not sure what would be the best for my choir, I think of, for example, 2 ways how to conduct it, and I stand in front of my choir and I ask them, which one do you prefer? We try the first one, the first signs I give, and then the second. And then they tell me the second one is better. The second one is more clear. And I go, great. Now I know what works for you, and they solved my problem. If you don't know how to conduct something when it comes to a certain transition, I'm not talking about the traditional signing of everything, which is described in the first video about choir conducting. I'm talking about certain complicated situations. You can always ask your choir. It's useful for them as well. And you are learning something because you can think of 3 ways how to conduct something because you are not sure which of the things are more important to be shown, and then they give you the answer. I've done that multiple times, and it's always met with respect because it's really helpful for them. They give me their needs. Eva, we need this to be shown. Please show it to us. And for example, recently I had a situation where my altos didn't know when they have to come in because it's a very difficult transition. And I said to them, listen, don't count, just look at me at that time. And everything was solved. I didn't know they needed that, but they told me they needed it and I showed that. Sometime your choir knows what's best for them and what they need. Use it. Okay, the next thing. Put your choir in a situation to notice you. I love doing this. Okay, so you learn the new score and they're always looking at the score. And the problem is, if they're looking at the score all of the time, they are not noticing you. And you start singing la 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 la, and you're conducting. And they think that you're conducting, you know, just the regular conducting, showing the tempo. And they think they know everything and they don't have the reason why they should look at you because they have better things to do. They have to figure out the correct notes. But a few of the people in the choir are always watching you. That's always the case. And at a certain point, you do something differently. For example, they have a longer note and they need the sign to continue with the next one. And you stop a bit longer than you usually do. And what happens? A few of the people that were looking at you respected your signs, but the rest of the choir who weren't watching you go on their way, and the whole thing falls apart. And the people in the choir who were not looking at you suddenly look at you and were like, what happened? And then you go, you see? That's because you weren't watching me. So they go, okay, I will watch you now because I don't want my choir to fall apart because I'm not watching my conductor. I know it's a tricky, thing to do. And of course, don't do that on a very silly or useless place. I mean, you have to stay really rational. You don't do that on a random note. You do that on a logical note. But if you have that kind of situation, it's a very good thing to do. They quickly become aware of the importance of watching you while conducting. When it comes to ritenutos and stuff and going back to tempo, never measure it for them. In a way, we are now going to learn how we're going to slow down. Don't put it into ratios. Just tell them, here, you will start slowing down. You have to watch me because we are not going to slow down every time in the same way. That depends on the way the music came to this point before this. That is also a very good way to make your choir watch you. And finally, they have to look at you. And how to do that? Well, I have this rule during the rehearsals and during the performance. My choirs know this rule. If I'm standing in front of them and we are about to begin the score, we are about to begin singing, and there is a single person in the choir who is not looking at me at that very moment, I will not start. I will never start. If I see that I don't have everyone's eyes on me, that can last for 30 seconds or for 3 seconds, but with time they learn that I'm very serious about that. Because if I don't have them for the very beginning, I don't have them at all. Okay? So tell them that rule and stick with it. It's not so difficult to stick with it, trust me. You just stand there and wait. And eventually the person who is not watching you will think, what's with the delay? And then they will look at you and you will go, okay, now we can start. The games we play with the ones we love. And finally, really briefly, but really importantly, what you can do about your conducting when it comes to the performance and when you're on the stage. The first thing I will say, the way you enter the stage says a lot about you. Practice that as well. What happens between you in the rehearsal room and you on the stage, the walk, the climbing up the stairs, the running into your choir singers and telling them something. Practice that. Especially practice that moment when the choir is already on the stage, and there is a video about that here. When they're on the stage, but you have to enter alone. The way you walk on the stage, the way you behave on the stage, the way you take a bow, and you do need to take a bow, you need to acknowledge the audience. It doesn't have to be a literal bow, but you have to acknowledge the audience. I've been in situations where I've watched a choir perform and their conductor didn't even turn to the audience. That sends such a bad message. It sends that to me, it looked like he didn't believe in the choir and he didn't want to be there. And the stage fright is a really difficult thing. Unfortunately, you're not allowed to letting your stage fright mess everything up. That is just the harsh truth. But we come back to the metronome. If you develop your inner sense of tempo and you know your score really well, and you know your choir really well, and you practiced all of the time, that motor learning did something for you, and it will save you even during the biggest stage fright. Additionally, the control you want to have on the stage of your choir, and in general of the situation, you have to gain it before entering the stage. So if you're with your choir before entering the stage and everything is like, ha ha ha, they don't even know that you're there and they don't even look at you, and then they are not even listening to you when you're there talking to them or trying to give them some input before the stage, you will lose the precious time. Because if they're all, when it comes to their concentration, and then they go to the stage, that time they ought to fill with, concentrating on the score, they have to lose on concentrating on the fact they are in a performance. Work with your choir in a way that before entering the stage, you already have them. You already have their attention. That you don't have to earn it on the stage. You already have it before the stage. And when they come to the stage and when you start your performance, you already have them in your hands. Such a dramatic ending of that story, but I really hope it was helpful. You can practice all of the scores you wish, but it's not the way you're going to become a conductor. Conducting is a skill, and it needs to be developed in a way that you can take any car, any score, any road, and you can drive the car. Any score, any choir, any time of the year, any day, good day, bad day, in any situation. These little exercises and weird tips I've given you in this video are coming from that place. So I really hope at least some of these things turn out to be extremely efficient for you. Don't be afraid. Conducting is something that gets easier with time. Again, 10 years ago, I never conducted. I never took an official class of conducting, but somehow along the way, it became a vessel and not something I had to really focus on during my choir performances. Practice it and trust that you can do it. Thank you for watching, dear choir people. If you wish to see more from the channel, you can subscribe, you can like the video, or you can watch all the other videos here. There are a lot of them. If you wish to talk to me, you can email me or put something down in the comments. And the current schedule is new video every Sunday. And so far, I'm doing better than I thought I would. Thank you for all the lovely comments, and thank you for watching. Thank you for being here and sticking with the channel. Conduct well, conductors, and I'll see you next time. Bye!